Know if you've already watched the last presentation that I gave, but for those of you who are watching this and don't know me, my name is Sam Gregor-Stewart, and I've been working in the role-playing game industry for about 14 years now. 10 of those were at Fantasy Flight Games, and about 3 of them were here at Edge Studio. Um, More pertinent to this particular discussion, I've also been a longtime fan of Twilight Imperium. It was actually the first board game I ever purchased, which, given that it was $100 back in 2005 when I was just a broke college student, was kind of a big deal for me. More recently, I got the opportunity to be a part of Dane Beltrami's playtests for 4th edition Twilight Imperium, and went on to develop a lot of the story and write a lot of the setting information and the fiction for the expansion Prophecy of Kings. Uh, in fact, some of you may recognize or notice the uncanny resemblance between me and the Federation of Soul character on the Federation of Soul faction sheet. Although I'll admit I don't have the singularly epic facial scar that he does. Um, so, needless to say, doing a Twilight Imperium role playing game has been very high on my list of things to do. And when we created Genesys, it always felt like Twilight Imperium was going to be an inevitable expansion. It, we were always planning that we'd want to do a Twilight Imperium setting supplement for Genesys. Um, so that was several years ago. Fast forward to now at Edge Studio for the past year, we have working on a setting supplement called Embers of the Imperium. Our work, when our work was just beginning, we also worked on a release for Free RPG Day called Ashes of Power that would preview that. And I believe for those of you in Poland, you will have a chance to obtain Ashes of Power for yourself at some point here in the future if Rebel Games has anything to say about it. So that should be fairly exciting. It's a free well, it's not a free, sorry. It's a self-contained adventure with 4 playable characters and the core rules for Genesys. So you get a chance to both learn the game and also experience the setting, and it's really cool. Um, so last year and change, honestly, we've been working on creating this expansion, which still has not been released yet, but we're planning on getting this out this year, global supply chains willing. So how do we take a setting that is literally as large as a galaxy and distill that into a single role-playing book that is under 300 pages? So those of you who have already listened to my last presentation may have heard me talking about themes, um, and how important themes can be when you're translating a role-playing game from a board or a card game. So the themes of Twilight Imperium, and especially the ones we really wanted to focus on, were themes like the shades of gray. There's not so much good and evil in the setting. There are some factions which are pretty bad, no question. And there are some factions which seem pretty good, but that's a little more of a question mark. But most of the factions in Twilight Imperium are sort of morally neutral, um, in the same way that a lot of governments are in the real world. Another theme is politics and intrigue on a galactic scale. Politics is a huge part of the Twilight Imperium board game. I'm sure most of you already know. And that level of political dealing, intrigue, backstabbing, um, we needed to make sure that made it into the game as well. And then finally, we wanted to evoke these ideas of ancient evils stirring from the history of the galaxy. So, Prophecy of Kings, there was already ancient evil coming, or ancient bad news coming back from the galaxy's past and erupting in the present day in the form of the cybernetic L1Z1X, who are the basically the zombified remnants of the previous galactic rulers. There's this thing called the necrovirus, which is basically a rogue AI that wants to kill all organic life. And then Prophecy of Kings brings two more pretty bad factions into it, including awakening um, this ancient evil that was thought to be defeated like 30,000 years ago in the form of the Mahakt. It's 20 or 30,000 years ago. It's a long time ago. Might be 40,000 years ago. Any case. Uh, and then also these flesh demons called the Volwraith. So that's become a really big part of the TI setting. And so, how were we going to evoke all that? Well, back even before we started on Twilight Imperium, Dane and I were discussing at Fantasy Flight Games how we would do it if and when it happened. And Dane suggested something like the Spectres from Mass Effect. Um, what if the Galactic Council had an elite force that they had organized that was sent out to deal with the real big threats? So, sort of like the Spectres or special agents, a mix of MI5, the CIA, all sorts of like counterintelligence groups. And so, yeah, this elite team of badasses, which is always a good starting point for a role playing game. Doubly good because they were organized by the Galactic Council. So, suddenly we had an opportunity to let people play any species from TI because most of the, well, technically all of them are somehow linked to the Galactic Council. We can quibble over details about the like Necro and L1Z1X and all them. But in any case, so everyone's a part of the Galactic Council, so they can all send people to be a part of this new organization. But then we get back to those themes I was talking about. And to evoke those themes, what if the new group they created was split by infighting from the Galactic Council? What if they didn't really have much in the way of resources because every one of the member factions was supposed to supply them, but nobody really wanted to give them too much because they wanted to save it for their own, save resources, ships, people, weapons for their own stuff? And what if everyone in this organization had their own agenda because they might still just be loyal to their old faction even when they join this pan galactic unified organization? And that is when the Kalares were born. So this, once it shows up, is the logo of the Kalares. So the Kalares are exactly that. They are a council. They are an organization formed by the this galactic council in the wake of something in the setting called the Acheron Gate disaster, or it has a number of names, but it's basically when the Mahakt, this ancient group of deranged gene sorcerers that ruled the galaxy tens of millennia ago, and were defeated by the last ruling group, the Lazex. When they suddenly get reawakened from slumber on their crypt world and they come back. And that really focuses on the idea that there are these pan-galactic threats in the galaxy and somebody needs to deal with them. So the Kalaris are formed by the council. Um, as a little aside, the name Kalares actually came from Katrina Ostrander suggested we use the name Solaris, which is the ancient bodyguards of the kings of Rome, Latin. But then another colleague, Tim Cox, suggested calling them Calares with a hard K, um, so that they didn't sound so much like celery in English. And so we changed them to the Calares that you hear now. Um, so the Calares are this organization, like I said, and they have a number of adventures that they can go on. We set them up so they can be fighting these great threats, for example. Since any one of these pan-galactic threats, murderous cyborgs, the L1Z1X, the um, insane AI that is out to kill organic life, the necrovirus, these hyper arrogant gene sorcerers, the Mahakt, who believe that everyone should be subservient to them, and then finally these flesh demons called the Volraith Cabal that basically want to turn the galaxy into a mirror of their own hideous flesh dimension, which is bad. It's you know, obviously nobody's going to survive that. All of these threats fall into the remit of the Calares, and they have to undertake missions to try and slow them down. They have to organize the various great civilizations to try and fight them. Um, a lot of cases, they have to do investigations because, like the Mahakt, have this gene sorcery that allows them to um, basically create puppets, sleeper agents who they can control over vast distances and might be like your friends and family. Or the Volraith Cabal, I mean, it's pretty easy to see when one of these demons shows up, but they also have large cults of the disenfranchised and underclass of society who have been tricked into believing that they will gain some sort of power or authority in the new hell dimension the Volraith want to create. So you can do investigating cults with them. So that is a big part of playing Emperors of the Imperium, is fighting these great threats. But also, you're going to be you can investigate strange things like the Empyrean, this weird nomadic race that has apparently been around ever since the earliest days of the galaxy, but now is starting to show up with more frequency, and they live in space. Um, or the ghosts of Creus, who also come from another dimension and have mastery over wormholes that allows them to appear anywhere in the galaxy. Um, and then finally, and where we really get back into that intrigue, there's a whole lot of adventures based around trying to keep the Cold War between the various great civilizations, keeping it cold-ish. And that is not technically the Calaris' authority, but one of the cool things about the way we created them is the Calaris can basically do whatever they think they can get away with. Um, so they are very much deniable assets. If they want to undertake a mission that will stop one faction from doing something that's going to give them an advantage over another faction and may lead to a war, they can totally do it. If they're successful, they stop an intergalactic war. If they fail, they will probably just be disavowed by the people who run the Calaris, the Tribuni, and sent off into purgatory or arrested, any number of things. So that offers some great initiative and heroics on the part of the players. They don't just have to be doing what they are told. Um, some other things I wanted to talk about very briefly is the betrayal and agenda mechanics that we're working on. So we wanted to create some mechanical incentives um, for players to basically be doing some interplayer conflict without it becoming without it becoming overwhelming for the game. So every player's character gets their own agenda, which may or may not be. You choose your own agenda, I should say. You don't get it assigned to you, but you choose it, and it may or may not be conducive with the overall goals of the group. But as you work closer to your agenda, um, you will eventually have an opportunity to try and resolve it. You and the game master create this opportunity. Um, Maybe it's downloading secret blueprints of other factions, war suns for your own faction, so you too can build your own Death Star. Or maybe it's something like maybe it's something a little more like personal, like um, you owe a debt to a crime boss and you're trying to pay it off. Or maybe your family, like a sibling, got into trouble with the law and you're trying to get them out of that trouble and back into a regular life. But whatever happens, you get a opportunity to complete this agenda at the very end. And your colleagues, your fellow players, have an opportunity to help or maybe try and stop you because maybe their own agenda conflicts. And we do some things like incentivizing players to go along with it by like giving out rewards for engaging in this. And honestly, we also encourage, depending on the group, we encourage you can either keep secrets from the other players, which can be fun if everybody sort of trusts each other and you get along really well. Or you can do the players know what's going on, but you role play the characters as if they don't, and that can help to avoid a lot of actual infighting and hard feelings. Um, and then another thing, of course, we needed to make sure we did is make sure you could play all the species that show up in Twilight Imperium, because one of the things that is a real big deal about Twilight Imperium is there's 24 factions, and most of those factions have their own unique species involved. So obviously, this is two of them: the Hylar, the aquatic species that runs the universities of Jolnar, and a Letnev from the barony of Letnev, the sunlighted verse, blue or gray skinned humanoids. I won't call them space elves, but obviously there's a bit of that in there. So we designed it so you can play. I think it's 14 total species, including some particularly odd ones like the new Nazroka, which is a symbiotic dual species. And in that case, one character is both the Naz and the Roka. So that's it. That was an interesting mechanical first we did, where a single player is going to control two characters that basically work together. Um, there's also, of course, humans. It's always humans. There's the Hakan, the Zicha, um, the Shikrai, the Gashlai. I mean, it goes on and on. So that is another thing we wanted to make sure we did. And finally, there is, of course, going to be a lot of. There will be enabled for like space combat. We wanted to focus, really play up the idea that this Twilight Imperium is sort of set in it's set in a world where like space and space combat and sort of feels like the turn of the last century with ironclad dreadnoughts. Air power is just starting to become a thing. Um, so you have sea power is really the way you project across the world. So in this case, space power, your dreadnoughts are how you project power across the galaxy. And smaller ships are used for raids and commerce raiding. You have to protect convoys and so forth. So yeah, I could probably talk about this for a lot longer, but so to avoid rambling, I'm going to wrap things up there. We are hoping again, co- um, pandemic and global supply chains willing to have this be released this year. Um, and so, if anybody has any questions they want to ask about Embers of the Imperium, please, now's the time to ask.
You can also unmute yourself and ask it on voiceover and not via chat.
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to fully understand that.
Sorry, all of you are able to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Um, I apologize. I'm still wasn't sure if that was a question directed at me or if that was saying that the audience could all ask a question.
I hope that everyone can hear me. It's just like if you have any questions on like the difficulty with English into Polish translation, I can do it by myself. If you want to ask something in Polish, I will translate it. That's normal.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, I really appreciate you having me here to talk about this. And if you're tuning into this later, I hope you found this enjoyable. Um, and yeah, I hope you enjoy. Everyone in Poland gets a chance to really enjoy Ashes of Power. I think you'll find that a fun adventure and a real fun introduction to both Twilight Imperium, the setting, and Genesys, the role playing game. So be sure to check that out.